Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yasmina Greco. I'm with O'Reilly Media, and I will be your host for today's webcast. Today, folks, we have a special treat for you all. We have Dr. Meagan Timney presenting UX Design for Digital Books, Creating Engaging Digital Reading Experiences. Meagan is a senior product designer at Blurb, Inc. Her expertise includes goal-driven and user experience design, usability testing, information architecture, content strategy, research, and writing. Before working in the private sector, she earned her PhD in English literature and was a postdoctoral fellow and assistant professor in the Electronic Textual Cultures Laboratory, the University of Victoria in Canada. She has over 6 years teaching experience at the university level. She has taught courses ranging from first-year composition to graduate-level digital media studies. As a postdoc in digital humanities, she researched theories and practices of digital scholarly editing and publishing, interactive digital media, and human-computer interaction. Meagan will be speaking at our TOC Tools of Change for Publishing conference, folks, in New York on February 12th through the 14th. We hope those of you that are attending the conference will attend her session and maybe stop by and shake her hand. We're really excited to have Meagan with us today, folks, to present this webcast for you all. As we get things started, I would like to go over a little housekeeping to help you get the most out of today's webcast. You'll want to open your group chat widget if you haven't already done so. This is where we can interact with each other during the event and where you can submit your questions for Meagan. We find that our audience usually has a lot of good knowledge to share, so we encourage you all to chat freely during the event. However, if you have questions for Meagan, please preface them with a capital letter Q so we know that they're for her and we can make sure she sees them for Q&A. You can also open, move, and resize any of the other widgets. If you'd like to tweet from the Twitter widget today, you may need to give it permission to access your account. It will automatically append the event's hashtag to your tweet so you don't have to. And folks, today our hashtag is TOCCon, all one word. If you should have any trouble during the event, please take a look at your help widget. If you continue to have problems, please post it in the group chat and one of our staff will help you right away. For choppy audio or stalled visuals, please try refreshing your window. And remember, the best thing you can do for a good audio stream is close any apps that could interfere. People always ask, so we'd like you to know, we are recording today's webcast and we'll have the archive ready usually within 48 hours. And folks, at this time, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to Meagan for her presentation. Hello, Meagan.
Hi, great. Hello and welcome to my webcast. I'm really excited to be here today with you to discuss the future of digital books and publishing. And so today I'd like to talk a little bit about how we can apply UX design strategies to the creation of what I'm calling digital reading experiences or digital books. So first I want to talk a little bit about how I came to be studying this topic, why I'm really excited about it, why I feel it's important, and then I'm going to move into what UX design is, how I think we can apply it to digital publishing, as well as looking at some of the principles in print design that we can transport to the design of digital books. This is not a technical presentation, but really rather a theory and a model for UX design for books. I hope that you'll get from this talk that we really don't need to reinvent the wheel, and that a lot of what I'm discussing today is about taking really common sense practices and porting them from print publishing to screen. This presentation is about articulating UX as a defined process, as part of the publishing process, and it's not prescriptive, but rather exploratory. Also, as Yaz said, I'm going to be speaking at the TOC conference in New York in a few weeks, and I would love to see you there. This webcast is just a taste of the longer workshop where we'll be going through some hands-on exercises and ideas about how to apply some of these methodologies and practices that we'll be talking about today. And of course, I welcome any thoughts and feedback or questions you may have either via Twitter or email, so I'll be happy to hear from you. A little bit about me. Yaz gave me a great introduction. I am a consummate book lover, currently working as a senior product designer and interaction designer at Blurb. And I'm also a hobbyist writer. So I feel like I've got sort of a really good position in the publishing world in terms of knowing how I write and how I design. And so I'm hoping to impart a little bit of that to you today. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the spark, the inspiration for this. My webcast and TOC talk are based on some ideas that have been percolating over the past year or so, inspired by two tweets, one by Hugh McGuire and one by Craig Maud. So the first is Hugh McGuire's tweet said the distinction between the internet and books is totally arbitrary and will disappear in about 5 years. Start adjusting now. The second tweet, Craig Maud at the Yale Publishing course tweeted, let's forget about traditional publishing timing. We now work in software. Let's think about software timing. So this was really an epiphany for me as well, the spark of an idea. And I thought, okay, so if the distinction between the internet and books is disappearing, if we're actually working in software, then I came up with this. If digital books are essentially websites and applications, if we are designing software, then it follows that digital publishing stands to benefit from UX design methodologies, just as web design and software design has benefited from user experience designing. So Hugh McGuire says, what is a book, after all, but a collection of data, text, and images with a defined structure, chapters, headings, and captions, metadata, with a title, author, and ISBN, prettied up with some presentation designs. In other words, what is a book but a website that happens to be written on paper and not connected to the web? So if we take this idea that the book is really a website, then maybe we can apply UX design methodologies to it. So when I say UX design, what do I mean? Well, there are many different definitions of user experience design, but I like to break it down into the following. The first is understanding people and their relationship with computing, how they interact with the machine. The second is understanding creators and their relationship with their audience. And finally, the sort of crux of user experience design is creating interfaces and interactions that are based both on the user and the creator needs. And understanding that both the future of books and digital publishing is intrinsically connected with technology, as Craig Maud says, but really making sure that we are understanding the process for authors and designers and publishers. Okay, so user experience design allows us to make things findable, usable, meaningful, seamless, and beautiful. The core principles of UX were delineated by Donald Norman. He called user experience design and user-centered design the notion that design decisions should be based on the needs and wants of users and their expectation of how the product works. And as I said, UX design is not a single thing. It's actually a conglomerate of things. So information architecture is about making things findable. Interaction design is about making them usable. Content strategy is about making them meaningful. Experience design is about making them seamless. And visual design is about making them beautiful. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory as to why UX design could help create findable, usable, meaningful, seamless, and beautiful digital book experiences. But just to reiterate, the book as a physical object has a specific kind of design. And the migration to the digital canvas allows us to create different kinds of design. With the invention of ubiquitous computing, mobile tablet technologies, we're offered new modes of interaction and means of highlighting supplementary contextual content. There's also changing modes of distribution, changing technical standards, and changing platforms. So it's really important here, I think, that we create an integrated process for the creation of digital books. So a little bit more about UX design for the web. There's certainly a defined process at this point for UX design for the web, starting with goals, business goals, figuring out what the stakeholders want, determining success metrics, figuring out functional requirements, what features a specific web interface or software interface needs, and the kinds of technical requirements that it requires, and then going into a process of user research, inquiries, interviews, and from that research, synthesizing it into a series of user experience deliverables, such as personas, process flows, mental models, sort of get a good idea of the users and their tasks, and then taking that and translating it into content architecture, the sitemap, the wireframes, clickable prototypes, taking that, turning it into a visual design using mood boards and design comps, and then taking that and looking at how that integrates with the technical architecture, UI design development, and then making sure that you run quality assurance with user testing, focus groups, and surveys. So this can exist at both a macro level. You start at goals and you go all the way through to user testing just once and iterate just in each of the tiny little phases. Or you can iterate and go through goals all the way around the circle in sort of more of an agile process. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in the talk. So if UX design for the web is really building out a story for your piece of software, then this brings me to my first major point. UX really is a form of narrative, right? If we take print design principles and port them to the digital, it's common sense that they've got a beginning, middle, and an end. But you're also putting boundaries and terminology around a process. So in Freytag's Technique of the Drama, in 1863, he wrote that in action through characters, by means of words, tones, gestures, the drama presents those soul processes which man experiences from the flashing up of an idea to passionate desire and to a deed, as well as those inward emotions which are excited by his own deeds and those of others. So here we're talking very specifically about the audience's emotional connection to a narrative. And I think that this is where the similarity between the user experience in digital books and the narrative comes into play. So the exposition really creates the tone, introduces the characters, provides background information. This is really the business needs of a project. And then the rising action or the complication is really a development of conflict, often set in motion by a catalyst. So here you can imagine that this rising action or conflict is the stakeholders battling for their needs to come out first. In a narrative, this would be, for example, in Hamlet, where the ghost urges Hamlet to take action. And then the third point, the climax of the narrative, the turning point. This is where stakeholders and designers agree on a course of action. In Hamlet, again, for example, he chooses not to kill Claudius. But this, in Freytag's definition, is always for a tragedy. I don't think that the UX narrative is necessarily a tragedy, but I do think that this sort of idea of the climax, that turning point, the decision-making process, is really important and crucial to the narrative of UX. And then the following action, it really focuses on the forces that are opposing in drama, the tragic hero, but here it's figuring out how you can build the user needs and the creator needs, put them together to create something perfect and wonderful and exciting for the user. And then that denouement, that moment of final suspense is, can we get it done? Can we ship it on time? So I really see UX as a form of narrative. As Francisco Inchosti says, stories allow for the most complex of ideas to be effectively conveyed to a variety of people. This designed product or experience can offer then meaning and emotion for its users. So if we imagine that UX is a narrative and we map this to narrative features, if you're a writer, you will see that the characters are really the personas, the setting, where people are and what they're doing, the task-driven mental models, the plot, user flows and scenarios, how they go about their processes, their reading, and the tone and the mood are the visual mock-ups. So at the TOC talk, I will be going much more into depth in each of these and how to build mental models and personas and user flows and scenarios. This is really just an overview. So if you want to learn more, come to New York. Okay. So if we think about UX as a narrative, and we think about the codex or the physical book as a narrative, it's bound. Literally and metaphorically, the form has already been defined as it's been used for hundreds of years. The paratext, or the information around the book, such as conversations in book clubs, people sitting on the beach reading their books, that sort of setting and where they are, those paratexts exist outside of the bounded physical form. So the book itself, that narrative, is contained within the boundaries of the covers. Right? And this has in common with it the narrative, which is also bounded. It has a beginning, a middle, and end. The physical form of the book mirrors that of the narrative. I think it's really important to remember, as Maud says, that print is a technology as much as desktop computers and tablets are technology. One of the qualities most natural to the user experience of print is a sense of potential completion, defined by the physical edges. It is a quality that is wholly unnatural to digital formats. And so if we think about the book as a digital object, it's unbound. It's unbound in the sense that it hasn't yet been defined. We don't quite know what the new digital reading experience will be. It might be unbound like the infinite canvas that Peter Myers talks about in Breaking the Page. But the purpose of UX is to take this unbound form, this infinite canvas, this idea that anything is possible, and put defined constraints around it so that the user doesn't get lost and so that the creator can meet their goals. So the narrative of the digital book is not yet set. The narrative of UX can help us create it. So I'm arguing here that UX practices help us define the constraints and characteristics of the new narrative of the digital book. But what do I mean by digital book? Obviously, it's not just a single item. There are multiple types. There are reflowable eBooks, fixed format eBooks, enhanced eBooks with audio and video, and apps as books. They come in multiple formats, in EPUB, in Mobi, in different Amazon formats, iBooks, PDF, HTML5, any web technology that allows for graceful creation of metadata can be in EPUB or eBook format. We also have different platforms, different instances and places where people read on mobile, on their phones, on their desktop, using a Kindle, using different kinds of devices. And so one of the things we need to do when we're designing our digital books is understand which type, which format, and which platform we're building for, because we can't just design for all of them. Each one has its own particular constraints. And so how do we figure out how to do this? Well, first we have to understand that UX is a holistic and nonlinear process. Right? UX, much like writing, requires short bursts of effort with some testing, with some iteration, some learning, some growing, allowing things to develop organically. Right? And so if we think about how this might work in a publishing team, we think about the characters of our UX narrative. We've got our editor, we've got our graphic designer, our producer, our developer, our marketer, our distributor, all of the usual suspects in a publishing house or publishing process. But I'm arguing here that the UX designer needs to be integrated into this plan as well. Whether you're a team of one and you're wearing all of the hats, or you've got a full stack team in a publishing house, UX is crucial. It's not a whole new method of creation. I'm not suggesting that we throw out what we've already got, but that rather we should integrate UX into the larger publishing processes. Just as software companies understand the importance of having UX designers on staff, so too do publishers and authors need to consider inviting UX designers or the UX process into the fray as part of a cohesive book creation process. So if a writer, as a creator of the story, the narrative, thinks of their audience, their genre, their narrative point of view, and what will constitute success, they're asking, who am I writing for, and what do I want to get them to get out of this experience? They will carve their diction out based on the genre, mystery novels, for example, setting foreshadowing hints as they gracefully create their narrative. The UX designer, this designer of the narrative on top of the narrative, thinks of slightly different things. The business goals, what the success metrics are, their audience and users, what interactions and features might be required in order to meet those goals. So the designer asks, who am I designing for, and what do I want them to get out of this experience? So these are two different roles. They might be the same person, but they do require different hats. And so this process for UX design for digital books looks very similar to the process of UX design for the web or for software. First, you must think of your goals. What do you want to get out of this book? You have to determine success metrics, and you can test them. They can be data-driven. Maybe it's a certain number of readers. Right? Then you need to determine your functional requirements and your technical requirements. This is all a process of putting constraint around your creation. Constraint is very important in a narrative. It allows a reader or a user to know where they are in all parts of the process. Right? So once you set your goals and your metrics, you determine what your requirements may be, then you do your user research, perhaps run interviews, create personas, get an idea of who it is who's reading your book. What type of person are they? What's their demographic? What's their reading style? Where are they going to be reading? What's their process? Are they sitting on the bus and just reading on their mobile phone and maybe they're getting interrupted a lot? Right? Or are they sitting on a beach where they can read uninterrupted for hours? The narrative will be different. Then you can put together your process flows and your mental models, working with the content, lay out a table of contents, or in the web world, that would be the sitemap. Determine some wireframes, do some sketching, some prototyping, overlay visual design, and then test it. And as I said, this process has two sort of main ways to go. We have one, in software development, we call it the Waterfall Method. So the Waterfall Method is sort of the macro level of traditional publishing, although each phase has its own iterative process. You start with requirements, you do research, you design, you implement, you do quality assurance, and then you maintain that website or that product. Right? And so it's really important, I think, here to know before you start what process is going to work for you, whether or not the team or your own individual preference requires you to start from the beginning, go to the end, sort of do it in one linear push, or whether or not you want to do something a bit more agile. So the agile or modular design allows you a little bit more flexibility. You, for example, could release a single chapter or a section of book, perform usability testing and user research, and then iterate as you learn more about what your readers want and how they will interact with your materials. And so the importance here of the modular design is that it allows you to do test-driven development. Release a very small subsection, a minimum viable product into the wild. Figure out what works, what doesn't. Fail early, learn quickly, move forward. So this agile model actually has precedence in the 19th century with Dickens' serialized novels, as well as with the technical books today. For example, O'Reilly's preview books. And Peter Myers released a preview of Breaking the Page to get some feedback early to figure out what kinds of information readers would want. And I think this model, Heg Arman talked a lot about the social book in his webcast. And the idea of wrapping a modular chapter into a social framework that would allow you to get instant feedback from your readers would make the finished product better. And so I would suggest that if you truly want to do a proper user experience design process for your book, that Agile is probably the way you want to go. Okay. But how does this work in practice? How do you integrate UX into digital book design? Well, the first thing is that content has to come first. The author is the content expert. There's a separation here, as I've been talking about, between core content and design. There's a narrative of the story, but then there's also the narrative of the design on top of it. And so while the content doesn't have to be fully formed, you do need to determine the following. You need to determine how the content is going to work with the design. And the way you do that is you figure out what your goals are. This goals are in design. Right? You start with an idea, and then you test it. And the way that you test it is you determine what kinds of tasks or actions your users are going to take in your digital book. And each of those tasks or actions will be mapped to an interactive component. So, and I'll talk about this a little bit more with finding content. But there's different kinds of tasks or actions here. We have search, for example, textual analysis, animation or widgets, how a user would interact with those, audio and video content, collaboration, social sharing, customized content, sort of how a user would interact with that, and also accessibility. So how do you build an interface that allows users who have accessibility issues to read your works as well? So just an example of what this might look like. And so this is what I'm calling the customer journey map. This is a very, very simple example of a task and component connection. And at the TOC workshop, we'll work more with complex narrative journey maps that outline an entire scope of a project, and I'll teach you how to design your own. So this is just a screenshot from a very small portion of one. So let's say, for example, that you have a user who sees a bird in her garden and wants to know what kind of bird it is. So she could go to the traditional field guide, and she could flip through it. She could, if she knew maybe the species or the family of birds, she could go to the front of the book, look in the table of contents, find hummingbirds, and sort through to see if she could find it based on the picture. Or she could go to the index. So there's a couple different ways that she could find content. Or she could go to her mobile field guide app. And so the tasks associated with searching are a little bit different here. Right? The digital realm allows for an opening up of content in ways that the physical book does not. So keywords, for example, simple keyword search. She could type in hummingbird, and she could get straight to the pictures of the hummingbird, and she could find it. Maybe she doesn't know what kind of bird it is. Well, iBird Pro allows you to search by characteristics. So different parts of the bird, what the tail shape is, whether or not it's hawk-like or pigeon-like, whether or not it has bright plumage or dark plumage. Each of those characteristics is its own search value. And then once she found the bird that she liked, that was in her garden, she could save that content for later, so that if she forgot, it was immediately findable again, akin to sort of putting a bookmark in a book. Right? So these tasks and components are mapped in the physical, but they're slightly different in the digital realm in the sense that the narrative doesn't necessarily have to be nonlinear, or doesn't have to be linear, that an index is not necessarily the only way to find information. So making sure that as you're designing your books, you map out these paths. You really think about what the user's goal is. For example, start with a question. Here, what kind of bird is in my garden? There's your user goal, right? And then you determine how that fits with your goals of providing a good resource for users to find birds as they would in a traditional field guide. So once you've mapped those tasks to components, the next thing I recommend doing is performing usability research. And it's really important here to test out with real users. I think this is one of the most exciting conjunctures of UX and publishing because it allows us to take advantage of a full suite of user testing options like usertesting.com, Crazy Egg eye tracking, Usability, Optimal Workshop with content trees. It really allows you here to put data behind your books. It allows you to run user tests, to view analytics, to fix usability issues, to improve and learn and make your books better as they go if you're using a modular design process, and allows you to iterate. So this is the point, I think, at which digital books really are software, that we're building them the way that we're building software and websites. And at the workshop, we'll go over how you can integrate this kind of user testing into your design process. If you're doing a mobile app or a mobile book, for example, you can just load software right onto it and generate heat maps, clickable heat maps. If you're using something like Pressbooks, you can get your Google Analytics straight from the book. And so I think it's really important here that you use data-driven design. So both Agile and Waterfall methods have their place in digital publishing and UX, but I think the ultimate question is, do the design choices work for the message you want to convey and the experience you want to provide? And that question is the crux of user experience. It's why we do user experience. It's making sure that we're always aligning our goals with both the reader's needs and our needs. And it's really important to remember here that it's not just information design, but it's also visual design. That design is visual rhetoric. It's a form of communication that uses images to create meaning or construct an argument. So it's important to be very cognizant of the visual message that you are putting forward in your books as well. So just to give you a couple examples of visual rhetoric. The first is this ad for milk. It's the Hulk. The Hulk himself has no definite connection to milk. But here the advertisement is using the Hulk as a metaphor, using the cultural cachet of the Hulk as big and powerful. And this associative imagery portrays meaning, that the Hulk is big and strong, so milk will make you big and strong, like the Hulk. This is very, very powerful visual rhetoric. Another example is the Clear app. So Clear is a simple, single premise that you have a to-do list and you can check things off. The visual design, the color, is a heat map that shows you priorities. It's that metaphor of red is higher in the list, it's more important. It uses gestural interactions. And so the design itself is this process of getting things done, that you swipe to close down a task to say you've completed it. So this is another example of visual rhetoric, using the very simple, clean interface of an app to mimic the simple, clean premise of single tasks getting things done. I think it's important to remember, as Don Norman says, aesthetics matter. Attractive things work better. He uses the example of a car. So you go get your car detailed and washed. Doesn't it drive better when you're in your brand new clean car and it feels like it's new? That this attractive thing just feels like it's better. So let's take this notion of visual rhetoric back to digital publishing. There's two things I want to talk about. I want to talk about remediation and born digital content. So our current aesthetic, the current visual rhetoric, is a simile. The simile is that a digital book is like a physical book. And the interfaces and accessories make this very important. It's this process of mimesis, this imitation of a physical form, and skeuomorphism, imitating physical objects in a digital form. Right? So we put book covers around our mobile devices. We put book covers around our digital reading devices to make them more like physical books. There are bookshelves in the iBook store so that when you pick a book off the shelf, it opens as it would when you take it off a shelf physically. Or we have plain text transcriptions, something like Project Gutenberg, which takes the text as most important. But digital publishing is moving away from remediation. And born digital content does not have the same restrictions as physical form. Born digital content can be unbound, it can be segmented or augmented, and it can be adaptive. And I think this is absolutely crucial, that we can design future interactions around content and context and affordances and build modular pieces of our books to create new aesthetics and new emotion. But in order to do so, we need to remember a few key things. The first is that UX is narrative. That we've got a frame, essentially a frame narrative here, a story on top of a story. That we use user experience as a way to put constraints around the object that we're building. So just like a book has a beginning and a middle and an end, user experience gives us that beginning and the middle and the end, the narrative of the design. We need to tell a story. If we do this, we will go a long way towards making our digital books and their content findable, usable, meaningful, seamless, and beautiful. So for a more in-depth and practical look at how we can actually integrate UX practices into the digital book, I recommend attending my seminar at TOC, where we'll go through how to create personas, how to create mental models, how they apply to digital publishing. I'll be providing practical, hands-on exercises for integrating UX design into the writing and publishing process. And I really hope to see you there. Thank you.
Outstanding presentation, Meagan. Thank you so much. Folks, we are at the Q&A portion of today's event. So if you do have a question for Meagan, please open your group chat, type it in, send it in, and she'll answer as many questions as we have time for. And with that, we do have several that have already come in. Are you able to see them, Meagan?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'll turn it back to you then.
Great. All right, so the first question is from Joseph Lockett. And he says, how does the idea of narrative and supporting context survive the frequent experience of a user dumped in the middle of a book through a link outside? And this is a great question. I think that one of the things we can do here, Joseph, is design UIs so that the user doesn't get lost in a narrative initially when they're dumped in from a different link. And so making sure that our interfaces allow them to find their way very quickly, whether or not that is pointing them back to a table of contents or a search bar, providing some sort of about information, of contextual information where they are. Inkling does this really well with the spine in their books that always lets you know where you are in the hierarchy or in the narrative so that you know how many cards there are left. And so I think making sure that we know what our narrative is first and then making sure we build that into the UI. Okay. Next question. This is from Anna. From your experience, do publishers want to explore UX? I haven't had a lot of opportunity to talk to smaller publishers about exploring UX. I think that people are definitely open to it. I'd like to have more conversations about it. And I think it's not necessarily something that has to be completely formalized. I think if we can sort of create an environment where authors know that they can perform some UX, that they can figure out how they want their book to be, then they can sort of take that to the publisher as well. So I think that people are definitely open to it, but I think that the conversation is still just starting. Okay. So Matthias Fail asks, will this unboundness maybe lead us to a new way of reading outside of 2D space, from switching pages to layering content in some kind of reading space? Absolutely. One of the things that I'm really interested in exploring is augmented content that allows you to pair both the physical and the digital. So for example, Layer is a really great app that allows you to map an image area on a physical magazine to a digital multimedia display, so video or audio, things like that. And so I think that the point here is that unboundedness allows us to interact with content in different ways. And maybe we don't want to think about it as just physical or just digital, but because print is not going to die. Books are going to be around for a very long time. And I think that the best use of the digital is finding ways to augment what's already working really well, which is a physical book. And I think you're also asking about switching pages to layering content in kind of reading space. Yeah, I think that the model for this maybe hasn't been completely defined, but I think that because of this unbounded space, we definitely have an option to layer content in different ways and allow for new methods of finding content. Okay. George M. asks, will proprietary formats disappear eventually? And do you think HTML5 will take over? Oh, this is a good question. I don't know is my honest answer. I don't know if HTML5 would necessarily take over. I do think that the digital book world is going to move very similarly to the way the web is, that we're moving towards more standardization, but also more choice in the technologies that we use. So in the web we have Ajax and JSON and jQuery and things like that. And I think that that will make its way into the book world as well. I don't see proprietary formats ever disappearing eventually necessarily, but I do think that these open source technologies are going to become more and more prevalent. Okay, Will Anderson asks, isn't a book different from the web in that it is bounded? You can finish a book, you can never finish the web. Absolutely, the web itself is completely unbounded and information is being created at lightning speeds. However, websites and software are bounded. So they're a smaller portion of a larger web. And so I think that a book, yes, is different than the web because it's bounded. And that like a website, a digital book can also be bounded, that it's really important here to understand that the narrative is the key, that we make sure that we're placing constraints around it. But yes, absolutely, the web is completely unbound. Okay, Alexander asks, do users find websites and apps that make a lot of books available through navigation confusing or helpful? Or do users prefer dedicated sites or apps for a single book? Oh, this is a good question. I wouldn't actually know whether or not they prefer one or the other without doing some more user research. I think that from my current experience, users really prefer having a dedicated app for the book that they're reading, but they like having lots of books available for finding. So I think that there's two things you're asking here. One is that sort of searchability or findability of books, and then one is that actual reading practice. And I think that the interface that they like for one or the other differs depending on the context and depending on the tasks. Okay. Angie asks, doesn't the UX also depend on what is available on the device? Absolutely. So in that process diagram that I gave you where I talk about technical requirements, that's obviously one of the important factors here is determining what the device that you're building for allows. And so it can be a chicken and egg problem if you want to create, say, a certain kind of interaction. Let's say you want animated images or widgets, interactive widgets, or you want to do something like McGraw-Hill's adaptive textbook. That might not work as well on an e-ink reader as it will on, say, a Kindle Fire or an iPad. And so I think it's really important just to remember that UX allows you to build in those technical constraints into the process so that you make sure that the design you create is supported by the platform that you're putting it on. Jake asks, do you offer training to small publishers to educate them in UX? Not as of yet, but if you send me an email, we can talk. Luca asks, did you already try to assess user engagement with digital publications, and if yes, how? Absolutely. So I've done a fair amount of research when I was in my postdoc on social reading environments and how users interact with social books, both running focus groups and eye tracking and also content and sitemap trees to sort of see how users are engaging with the content specifically. And so I find using sort of standard UX usability tools have been really, really helpful. But if you're really interested in this, Luca, we can just send me an email, and I'm happy to give you some books about how to assess this. I actually ran a human-computer interaction course at the University of Victoria. It was co-teaching, and so we had our students go through and learn how to do paper prototyping and figure out how users interact with the book. So I'd be happy to talk more with you about that. Okay. Dan asks, does the iBooks design environment and Apple's closed system allow for the sort of segmented testing process you mentioned? Can a partially finished book be integrated with those testing services and sites? This is a great question. Yes and no is my answer. I think if you decided to release a book as a chapter or a segment, you could do this if you could get it onto the iBook store. The process would take a little longer just because of the need to have it approved by the iBook store. But there's definitely a way to do this in that you can create the book and then you can update it and keep going, just understanding that you have to build in some time. And I think probably the best thing to do here, instead of doing your design testing in, say, iBooks, would be either to do paper prototyping or use something like Axure that allows you to do a full HTML prototype that you could put up on a web browser and then and test from there. And then once you're happy with that, then you can put it into iBooks. This is one of the nice things about UX is it allows you to do sketching and prototyping to really figure things out before you build the final product. And so this sort of iterative lean process allows you to save time in the long run, even though it's a little bit more work up front. Luca asks, how would you define reading experience and engaging reading experience? Okay, this is a great question. So I sort of see a reading experience as this holistic process rather than just a single book. And I'm still sort of working through this theoretically, but a reading experience is for the reader. It's the emotion and the connection they have. It's not just the platform. It's not just what they're reading. It's not just the content. But the engaging reading experience is really how the user is interacting with what they're reading. So it's more taking into account that holistic process and the emotion that they feel when they're reading, as well as what they're reading. Patrick Hogan, what are your thoughts on using PDF as a format for digital content? Great. I love PDF. I think that if you are doing content first, that you're not looking for a super amount of interactivity and that you want something fixed format, that you're really concerned more about your visual rhetoric and your layout, I think the PDF is great. I think it's a great format because it allows people to put it on pretty much any device. And I think that it allows the creator a lot of control over the interface or the design of their book or their publication. I think where you run into trouble with PDF is that it's not necessarily very integrated into, like for example, something like XML, EPUB, where you have access to the metadata, where you have access to the guts of the book, allows your book to be much more integrated in the sort of books as API idea that Hugh McGuire talks about. And I think that PDFs don't necessarily have as much option for that. But I think it's a great format. We use both. It just, again, it really depends on what your goals are. All right, more questions. Matthew Patulski, can you spell the name of the HTML prototyping app? Sure, it's Axure. It's A-X-U-R-E, Axure, and it's axurerp.com, I believe. Okay, Umberto asks, how do you see the publishing of interactive stories for children, trends and perspectives? So children's books and cookbooks, I think, are in many ways leading the way here, leading the charge for the best digital reading experiences, because they really focus on interaction, on how people are going to get to the content. So especially for children, because they have fairly low attention spans, I think it's a really good model for how to develop content that's interesting and engaging. And the same with cookbooks, because each one has a slightly different context. And I think that both of them provide great models for sort of what I'm talking about here, especially because children's books are often segmented in smaller chunks, and then they have different characters doing different things. So Hubert goes to the vet, and Hubert goes to work, and that kind of thing. So I think that the children's book model is really, really great, and offers a lot of opportunity for us to continue to create really engaging reading experiences. So Dom asks, what part does accessibility play into your methodology? Absolutely. So this would be in one of the early stages of the iteration in functional and technical requirements and user goals. So if accessibility is a huge part of what you're designing, then obviously the technical constraints and the design constraints are going to be different based on what you're creating. So it really, again, it's going to depend on the author or the publisher and what their goals are, but there's certainly a place in this UX process for accessibility. Absolutely. Spencer asks, how do you protect copyright material from being reused or misappropriated? Ooh, I'm not sure I can answer this one, Spencer. I think that my take here is that everything that I create in terms of my digital books and my writing is open source. So I actually don't have to worry so much about protecting copyright material. Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that one. I'm sorry. Okay, Moses asks, thanks for the presentation. Any general thoughts on the best ways for novelists to improve their ebook presentation? Definitely. Okay, so there's a couple things here. I assume when you're saying novelists, you're asking about text-heavy books that maybe don't have any illustration. And so if that's the case, we're probably talking about reflowable ebooks and or their counterparts, the fixed layout ebooks. And so there's a couple things you can do here. One, I think, is to think more about segmenting the books. So chapters and section headings, making sure that your table of contents is really, really strong, building in hyperlinks, and just making sure that that sort of flat presentation of the novel can work. If you're talking about, say, augmenting your novel with multimedia and images and that kind of thing, you might look into something a bit more like using different kinds of software to create your ebook that won't necessarily put it on e-ink, but might put it on like the iBooks. So for example, Blurb, the company that I work at, allows you to create ebooks that you could then post onto the iBook store. And so there you'd be able to link multimedia, link images, create enhanced ebooks. So I think in terms of the ebook presentation, if it's just a text-heavy book, your best choice is to go with reflowable text. But if you're looking for something that allows you to create paratext and contextual information around the books, I would say you're probably looking at something more like an enhanced ebook. And you have to think about the kinds of information that you'd want in your book. Richard asks, do you see the future where there will be a melding of narrative and gaming? Absolutely. I think this is already happening in a lot of games. I think MMOs are a great example because they have a narrative, these sort of epics, storylines that allow people to immerse themselves into a narrative story, but also then create their own part of that story. I think also the Walking Dead iPad app, to me, seems like a really great melding here of narrative and gaming. And I do see this going further and further to the point, maybe I was just looking at a virtual reality headset yesterday. Maybe at some point people will be reading their books on the VR as they're sort of going through the world that they're reading about. I think the one nice thing about using UX here is that it allows you to think of books as narrative rather than just sort of this just a book. I mean, we could be talking about games, we could be talking about music, we could be talking about news and journalism and all different kinds of publications. And so yes, I think that the genres are going to continue to meld. Christine asks, have you found the design of digital children's books follow different principles than typical adult-oriented book design? Yes and no. As I was saying earlier, I think children's books offer a really fascinating model for the design of digital books because they're predicated on the importance of engagement. And so if I found a difference, I think it's more that authors and publishers are more cognizant of the ways in which information needs to be presented so that people can, children can interact with it. And I think, like when you say adult-oriented book design, I assume you mean things like, if we're talking about nonfiction, like cookbooks, things like that. I think, again, it really just depends on what your goals are. From the authors I have talked to, it seems like everybody's process is the same and then it's different. Everybody writes and creates differently. And so it's always an organic process. Okay. Probably have time for one more question. Oh, that looks like all of the questions.
Perfect timing, Megan.
Great.
Yes, I don't see any additional questions. So with that, as we wrap up, folks, we'll just ask Megan, is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
No, just thank you so much for attending, and I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to shoot me an email or find me on Twitter.
Super. And with that, folks, we're going to say a very, very big thank you to you, Megan, for really presenting an outstanding webcast for us. Thank you so much for your time. Folks that attended, thank you for attending, and we hope you benefited from it. And all of you that sent in your questions, thank you so much for those questions, because having those questions just adds so much more to our events. We'd like to remind you all that we do have our TOC Tools of Change for Publishing conference coming up in New York, February 12th to the 14th, just right around the corner. We do invite you to take advantage of a special offer that we pushed out to you in your group chat. Use code Webcast to save yourself 15% on the registration. So we still have seats available, save 15% with code Webcast. Get your tickets today. If you like what you heard Meagan talk about today, please do attend her session, her workshop, because she's going to show you, literally it's going to be a hands-on event where she's going to show you how to do a lot of what she talked about today, and I know you don't want to miss it. And judging by all the chatter in the group chat there, lots of folks are excited about that, Meagan, so you should have a full house.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.
Folks, we did push out also a little link to you there. It's probably opened another window. We do invite you to sign up for our TOC newsletter. If you're not already receiving it, please consider signing up for that. Lots of good information to keep you in tune with what's happening, all the latest. We do have lots of information on top speakers, top people in the field. So please, we do want to make sure you do get that. Again, we thank you, Meagan. Thank you, everyone. This will conclude our webcast today. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.